Welcome back to In Trend, the podcast where we explore the ideas, innovations, and people shaping the future of the insurance industry. Today's episode dives into one of the biggest transformations happening across business right now: artificial intelligence, and more specifically, how AI is beginning to reshape the insurance world. From underwriting and policy administration to workflow automation, customer experience, and operational efficiency, AI is rapidly moving from buzzword to business strategy. But with all the excitement also comes important questions around implementation, risk, ethics, and the future role of people in the industry. Joining us today is Michael Strobel, Senior Vice President of Administration at USLI, who has been at the forefront of understanding how AI can be thoughtfully and effectively integrated into insurance operations and workflows at USLI. Michael brings more than 15 years of experience at USLI, where he's grown through a series of leadership and systems-focused roles, from policy issuer and underwriting assistant to administration systems coordinator, team leader, vice president, and now Senior Vice President of Administration. In this conversation, we'll discuss what Michael is seeing firsthand across the industry, where AI is already creating real value, the challenges organizations need to navigate, and what the future may look like as insurers continue adapting to this rapidly evolving technology. Whether you're excited about AI, skeptical of it, or simply trying to understand where the industry is headed next, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us on In Trend today to talk about AI and its use in the insurance industry.
Good morning, Melissa. I'm happy to be here with you.
So, Michael, why are we talking to you about AI?
Sure. That's a good question. One I'm probably asking myself a little bit, but no, I've been with USLI for over 15 years, been very involved in a lot of systems and workflow designs. And so as this technology has progressed, I've been sort of tapped and involved in a lot of the initiatives that we're trying to roll out and just trying to stay ahead of where AI is going, what it's doing, and how we can utilize and implement it here at USLI.
So AI obviously continues to be a hot topic across all facets of life. Talk to us a little bit about AI in general and how an individual may use AI versus a company.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they think about AI, they think of ChatGPT or Anthropic, planning their vacation, how they can utilize it to be more efficient in their day-to-day. They have to write a letter to, someone in their HOA, and they're like, hey, help me with this and help me work it out. And I think there's a lot of practical uses in a professional setting for individuals to use AI to be more efficient in their day-to-day as well. It's important to think about how a professional might use AI to be more efficient because they are ultimately still the driver of that decision. So I prompt AI, I see the response that comes out, and ultimately I own whether or not I want to accept that information, reject that information, modify it, or go back. So there's a lot of that I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast or have some exposure to AI have probably dipped their toes in already. Think about how companies use it. I think that's when you really start, or how a company could use it, again, at having their employees use the tools to help them be more efficient is an obvious way. But I think another component of it is, how can I integrate artificial intelligence into my workflows to make our company more efficient? And the mind immediately goes to, okay, well, what level of decision-making is the company going to be willing to let go in order to implement AI in their workflow? Sort of acting autonomously. And I think when you hear topics like AI governance, how it can be used, that's where a lot of the conversation is, because at the end of the day, an individual can be responsible for how they're using AI because they ultimately, at the end of the day, make that choice. But as soon as a company starts releasing a tool that acts autonomously on behalf of the company, I think there's a lot of questions around who's ultimately responsible, where does that accountability live, where does that responsibility live, and then what, role does the artificial intelligence play in a bad outcome or a positive outcome?
Right. So, Michael, how are we seeing AI being used in the insurance industry?
Sure. I would say from a policyholder's perspective, a lot of companies are going to be competing to try and make the sale of their products much more seamless, their ability to service much more seamless, and their ability to, offer coverage that is, also thinking about AI a little bit more effectively, I guess, being able to reach market. And so the other thing too is, as a policyholder, you're at such an advantage now than you probably ever were, because you now have this amazing tool that can explain to you what you might need as an insurance purchaser. If you buy a warehouse, you knew you needed insurance before, but you may not have understood why. And 10 minutes using Anthropic or ChatGPT will make you a much more educated potential policyholder. And so I think that's a real advantage, because the agents who are going to be working with those policyholders, or maybe it makes it harder, I don't know, are going to be much more educated around what they need and what the options are available to them. And so just getting information out there, I think, has been a primary driver of change in the insurance industry. I think policyholders have the potential to be more educated. Agents, I think, also from a prospecting perspective, have much more capability to go out and find potential leads that might have been more challenging before. They might have had to pay for it, but now, just trying to pull all that data is a lot more accessible now than it was a few years ago. And I think companies, or carriers, are really trying to find ways, similar to what the policyholders are trying to experience. They're trying to figure out how to deliver those experiences. How can we create faster, better, cheaper, more coverage experiences, and make that be more attractive to the people who are ultimately purchasing the insurance?
Right. How are you seeing it being used, maybe either on the claims side or in underwriting, or maybe even from a customer service standpoint?
Sure. I would say on the claim side, there's the barrier to filing a suit has dropped to almost nothing. And I saw an article the other day that I think the number of suits being filed is up a huge percentage. I know you're in claims, so I don't know if you have any experience with this in general. Before, you had to go to a lawyer, you had to do all these things to file a briefing and create something that really had some credibility to it. But now, with some of the tools out there, if my neighbor does something that I don't like, I could create a very professional looking lawsuit and file it myself without needing a lawyer. And so now that's a challenge for us as individuals. It's a challenge for carriers to try and figure out how we want to navigate through all those types of situations. From a claims examiner's perspective, I'd imagine that a lot of the reviewing documents will be able to be synthesized down to something to much easier. If you have an 100-page document to review, AI is able to summarize that pretty effectively. And so I think it's going to make them more efficient. The other thing that I would add as part of that is, a good claims examiner will know if something's off in what the AI is providing to them.
Right.
They have a lot of experience. And so it just speaks to, the underlying need for a good foundation, in your profession to be able to really take full advantage of these tools. And then also, I think, just from individuals, there's the propensity for, potential fraud with AI. If you're ever in a car accident and you take photos and you submit a claim, and maybe the person you're in an accident with is, a little less than honest, and they could change those photos to make damage appear worse or better than it actually was. And now someone's going to have to sift through, okay, what really happened? What was the real stakes here? And so that's certainly a risk and a potential for the impact to claims using artificial intelligence. Underwriting, I would say it's pretty similar in terms of, trying to summarize data. I think if you're underwriting a bar, for example, and you have an application and it's filled out on an Accord app, and you see a name and an address, you don't really know a lot about it. You kind of have to either go out and find information. But I think we've been able to utilize AI pretty effectively to say, okay, I have this risk at this address, tell me about it. And I think it can start to paint a picture of what the risk is to an underwriter as they're, underwriting the submission. And I think it helps speed their process. Like, you're going to approach a wine bar different from a sports bar, just as an example. And so if you can kind of quickly get that, you're able to kind of already start gearing your decision-making process to a certain way of thinking, but ultimately the decision is still going to rely with the underwriter who's underwriting and assessing the risk. From a customer service perspective, I think, a lot of people when they hear AI and customer service, they get a little weary. It's like, I don't want to talk to the bot. The long-term promise of AI, I think, what is being sold is that you won't be able to tell the bot from a person, and so I don't think that's something USLI will ever completely embrace. We don't want to lose that human connection and that human touch with how we interact with our policyholders, our customers, or anything like that. But, I know that artificial intelligence can also help us support the people supporting our customers. It's able to get them information faster. So if a policyholder calls in and says, I have a question about my policy, XYZ, we can utilize AI to supplement the person that they're interacting with to be able to get them that answer much more faster, much more quickly, eliminating, having to transfer calls and things like that. And so you're able to kind of elevate some of the customer service offerings by utilizing artificial intelligence effectively.
Right. I'm definitely guilty of wanting to speak to a human over a bot, for sure. So I think, you raised a lot of benefits with the use of AI, from cost savings to efficiency. What other benefits are you seeing with the use of AI?
Sure. Yeah, I think, it can make people much more informed and much more capable. I think it can also, if you use it correctly, and I don't know, maybe I think I use it correctly. I don't know what is correctly, but you can challenge yourself in your own way of thinking too. Like occasionally I'll be trying to work through a problem and I'll lay out all the facts into, an AI service or what I perceive to be the facts. And, I'll challenge it and challenge myself to, what am I not thinking of? Where are the gaps in what I'm trying to do? And whether I accept it or don't accept it, I think it helps me see things from other perspectives. It helps me know if, I totally missed this huge thing. That would have been bad if I missed it. And so it can be used as a learning tool, but I also think it has, I know you didn't ask about risk, but I'll bring it up. I think over-reliance can create issues with people taking what the output is and just accepting it.
Right.
And so that's something I always want to have people be cautious of.
Absolutely. So obviously that's a challenge to AI, right? Is accepting what it's putting out there, and that may not necessarily be accurate.
Yeah.
So brings up accountability.
Sure.
Right? Is that a challenge in terms of, the use of AI?
Sure. Yeah. Accountability is probably the challenge, not just a challenge. Another word that you hear get tossed around a lot when people are talking about AI is governance. How do we govern it? Because at the end of the day, AI has no means of accountability. It's ultimately a predictive model. So AI is just trying to string together words that make sense. So, and it's based on a lot of data that's been fed to it. So if you ask it a simple question like, is the sky blue? There's a 99.9% chance that the answer you're going to get is yes, because that's the most predictive answer, but you might get no.
Right.
And so there's an inherent risk of over-reliance on these tools for what they are. And I think it undersells how important it is to really make sure you have a good foundational knowledge of what you're trying to use it for, and not just totally relying on the output that it comes out with.
Right. What about security risks? I mean, that probably is also a big challenge, because now we're taking all this data in, right, and we're feeding it into AI, or potentially doing that.
Sure.
So what are you seeing from like a security risk standpoint?
Yeah. Security is, and I just want to touch back. If I can, a moment for the risks about accountability, and I'll touch to security. Ultimately, if we're trying to roll out an AI system here at USLI, I think who is ultimately responsible if it goes off the rails is the question that of the AI era.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the person who built the tool? Is it the person who okayed the tool? Is it the person who accepted the output? Is it the AI company that built the model that the agent was built in? And I think what we're going to really try to what we want to navigate over the next few years is trying to figure out, okay, well, one, is there an answer to that question? And two, how can we integrate AI in a way that allows us to take advantage of the benefits while also minimizing the potential risks of accountability even being an issue.
Right.
And so we want to keep humans and people and our underwriters and our claims people all at the forefront of the decisions that we make and things like that. Because I do think an over-reliance on the output of AI is a very serious and potential risk. And so we want to utilize the benefits and minimize the downsides. From a security perspective, all these models are trained on a lot of data, and it's a little legally, unclear where that data all came from and comes from. And so USLI wants to make sure we're doing our part to not contribute to that.
Right.
And so we have pretty strict and firm guidelines around what we allow people to input into our artificial intelligence tools, because we don't want our customer policyholder data getting out there and being trained. For other large language models, there's just an inherent risk there that once it's in the model, it's sort of, you can't get it back out.
Right.
But then there's also just the risk of your data integrity. There was a company a few weeks ago that had their whole database wiped out. I think it was in 8 seconds, and it was by an AI agent that did something that it was not supposed to do.
Right.
And so making sure the correct guardrails are in place when we're utilizing these tools can help prevent those things. And there's probably some inherent benefit to not being the first person through the gate. Let me let some other people make some of these mistakes before, so we can learn from them. But there are risks. Nothing's ever free.
Right. You mentioned before automation. So is there a difference between AI and automation?
Sure. I would say from what you're trying to do with it, no. But in terms of how it practically applies itself, there is a difference. So if artificial intelligence, it isn't intelligence, it's artificial, but it's still, it's trying to predict an outcome based off what the information that you give it and what it knows. So for example, if you were thirsty and you asked me to get you a glass of water, I could do a lot of things. I could go to the water fountain outside. I could pull a water bottle from over here. I could go upstairs to my floor and fill it up from the water cooler out there. And, I don't know. I just decided. And sometimes you're going to get a different answer. And, humans are kind of like that too, But if you had said to me, I prefer the water bottles, for example. Okay, well, that's artificial intelligence. It's working on natural language. Okay, well, I know you might prefer those, but you didn't tell me I had to get them. And so still might get you the water from the the water fountain outside. And so that's how, when they say, how does AI hallucinate? That's how AI hallucinates, is because you might felt like you gave it very specific instructions, but you didn't really, and it got confused about what you were asking or why you were asking. And so if you ever heard that term, that's a little bit what it is, or it's picking up information that wasn't totally applicable to the question that was being asked.
Okay.
So with AI, you're more than likely going to get an answer to your question, regardless of whether it's accurate.
Okay.
I would say when you try to automate something technologically, the parameters need to be much more precise. It needs to be much more tight. And if the conditions aren't there, it'll fail. So if you wanted water from the water fountain but there's no water fountain out there, it's just gonna fail. Whereas artificial intelligence, it might try there first, but then it'll go try to find some other source of water for you. Okay. And I'm sorry, I've painted you as a very thirsty person. So I apologize.
That's okay. So, obviously, we talked earlier about the human connection and, human thought really still playing a role in the decisions that are being made. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think, just from a regulatory standpoint, the states are coming out, with what insurance carriers can and cannot do as far as allowing artificial intelligence to make certain decisions. And so I think there's going to be some legal regulatory guardrails around totally automating some processes or workflows and things like that. And so again, and I also talked a lot about making sure we have that good foundation of knowledge as you're utilizing these tools. And so I think for the long-term impact on the insurance industry as a whole, those guardrails will help make sure that the industry stays stable, because I think it creates natural points for people to get into the industry, learn the industry, and ultimately, have a career and grow and have that good foundation knowledge. And I think it's, great as far as what USLI is trying to do and make sure we maintain that human connection for our policyholders. We don't think we want anyone ever thinking that they're dealing with a bot or, someone that doesn't care.
Right. Obviously, AI is changing by the minute.
Sure.
So talk to us about, how do you keep up with all these changes?
Sure. It's a good question. The other age that we're living in outside of the AI age, I guess, is the algorithm age. And so I've found, and maybe it's just because I'm so involved in it at work, my phone's listening to me, all the things that you might suspect. I feel like AI just gets in all my algorithms. I can't go on anywhere without seeing articles or things like that. So I would say the more you interact with AI on your phone, on your computer, the more it's going to find you, which is probably just a little bit of just the way things work now. But if you're at all interested on the topic, typing artificial intelligence into whatever podcast app you listen to, there's a lot of great podcasts out there. There's a tremendous amount of YouTube pages that you can interact with. If you really want to understand how to utilize the tools, and honestly, you can even just use AI itself to stay up on top of AI. I'm still a little bit of a sucker for some of the old traditional media. I still like to read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. I feel like I know they're written by humans, all the articles. I know that the sources are verified. I would just have a higher level of trust of some of the old traditional media, if you want to call it that, as far as, really staying on top of big changes or things that are going on within the companies, whether or not some of them are trying to go public or things like that. So I think, but those I would say would be the three best sources: YouTube, podcasts, and then traditional media.
What do you see with AI and the insurance industry, let's say, over the next few years?
Sure. I think a lot of companies are going to be figuring out how they can be more efficient, how they can get quotes out faster, how they can get claims serviced faster, how they can allow more self-service for policyholders. And, I think there's a lot of potential to really be able to speed up how we service here at USLI. And I also think, the promise of AI is that you're not going to be able to tell the difference between interacting with it compared to interacting with a human. And so when I say self-service, I think there's a lot of maybe resistance to that, because if you're a customer, you want to be serviced, I think sometimes. But if you are on our website, say, and you have a question about your billing, I think in a few years, you're going to have an interface to be able to communicate and say, hey, when is my bill due? And you're going to be able to get a response to that question without necessarily having to go and fish for it. So I think that's, in a customer service area, something that's going to be much more beneficial. And maybe that's on a company like USLI's website, or maybe that's through, one of these AI services. I think a lot of that we're still figuring out and will still be evolving. I might have given you a different answer last week.
Right.
But I think a lot of it is just going to be speed, accuracy, efficiency, and to the outward facing person, hopefully you're not going to notice a difference other than things are more accurate, things are more quickly. I think there's a lot of internal workflows that are going to be targeted first as from an efficiency play, and just from a, how can we do things better?
Right. Any final thoughts for us on AI and its use? And
I guess I would just say, to everyone listening, make sure you trust yourself as much as you're trusting the output. And if something doesn't feel right, use your own mind, use your own gut, and don't turn off your brain. I guess that would be my caution. I think there's some inclination to do that because the answers seem so good, but always trust, but always verify.
Right. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us on In Trend about AI and its use in the insurance industry. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Stay tuned for another episode of In Trend.